Hi, I'm Michael Hartman.
I'm Naomi Liu.
And I'm Mike Rizzo. And this is OpsCast,
a podcast for marketing ops pros
and RevOps pros.
Created by the Mo Pros, the #1 community for marketing operations professionals.
Tune in to each episode as we chat with real professionals to help elevate you in your marketing operations career.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another episode of OpsCast, brought to you by marketingops.com, powered by the Mo Pros. Joined today, we got all three of us again. This is 2 in a row. Naomi, Mike, say hello.
Hello.
Hello. I'm getting the chance to see Naomi's thermometer or thermostat rather in the background, and it just flashed 19 degrees, and I was like, "That's free
Celsius."
Oh, right, right.
Still freezing for me. That's still too cold for me.
It's like what would it be, around 40 Celsius for me outside. So thankfully I'm inside with air conditioning in Texas right now because second summer has arrived.
Second summer. What about second breakfast?
Yeah,
sorry, that's
exactly
where my head went.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, you heard we have a guest here today, unlike last time when we were the three of us. But today we are joined by Vivian McCormick. And she's going to talk to us about her journey from being an attorney to a founder and some of the lessons she's learned along the way with rebranding and going through legal stuff and trying to cross borders. So she is the co-founder and CEO of Willit. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. I should have asked before. A linens and bedding and home essentials brand based in Vancouver. And as I mentioned, Vivian started her career as an attorney before shifting to entrepreneurship. She has been a co-founder, consultant, advisor, and supporter of entrepreneurs since leaving her day-to-day practice of law. So Vivian, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Did I get that right? Did I pronounce Willit? Is it Willit?
You got Willit. You got it all right. Yeah.
Should I try to pronounce it with a Canadian accent? That's
Willit, eh?
Willit,
which is both then French and also the A portion of our.
There we go.
So it covers it all. Maybe that's
right. That's right. Okay. All right. Well, and I was looking at it, I'm trying to avoid showing my wife your site because I have a feeling we'll end up with new bedding.
Good. That's the point.
Yeah, and maybe the new bedding would be good for the hot climate that we're in.
Yeah, I think you need that. It's temperature regulating.
There you go. All right. There we go. All right. So we're gonna tie this. So for our listeners, there's probably some question marks going up over their heads about how is a founder of a linen company in Canada who is an attorney have to do with marketing and marketing operations, but we're going to get there. But why don't we, I think your story was interesting because going from being an attorney, I'm married to a recovering attorney myself, is what led you, what was the motivation for you to go from that to starting a business, and kind of what's the story there?
I think I've always made little jumps away from law towards business all along my career. So I actually started, in Canada, you do your undergrad, same as in the US, I believe. My undergrad is in commerce. It focused a lot on labor relations, so unions, collective bargaining, that kind of thing. And that got me interested in law school. So I went there and then law school and subsequently joining a firm had me move in a different direction again. So I started practicing in the area of real estate and banking and, loans and insolvencies. And then about 5 years into that practice, I really found myself wishing that I could see the inner workings of some of the business that's going on with clients at the ground level, as opposed to when you're in private practice, normally you get handed the deal and they need the paper done yesterday, and you have no control or even input at that point into the inner workings of that business. So my next step was actually into in-house counsel in our country's development bank, so Business Development Bank of Canada. They fund only entrepreneurs. It's not a deposit-taking bank. It's simply loans to entrepreneurs to support small and medium enterprise in Canada. And I think a combination of that and some other external factors that were happening in my life at the time when I was there really had me start thinking about entrepreneurship. And I think it was about 2012 through 2016. I think entrepreneurship was getting sexier. Everybody wanted to listen to podcasts about, and I did too, right? I listened to startup podcasts,
so good.
right? It was so good years ago.
How I Built This.
Yes.
How I Built This.
All of them.
Yeah.
And so I started to get that bug a little bit more, though outside of some late nights in my law office wondering what I could invent to kind of get away from law, I really never saw myself as actually an entrepreneur. I saw myself more as possibly a consultant to entrepreneurs. I have that background in knowing how to help entrepreneurs get financing. And I thought that's the direction I would go. But in the time when I outside of my in-house counsel role, finally transitioned away from that, thought I would do some consulting. I have two co-founders in Willit, and one of them brought this idea to the other two of us. And it was not the first idea she'd brought to us. Most of the other ones were like, one, that's not going to make any money, or two, that's completely going to get someone sued. So no, we're too risk averse for that as lawyers go. So I've always moved in that direction. And I think this opportunity was both about the product we wanted to bring into the world and to primarily bring to Canada, because at the time you really couldn't get it in a very cost efficient way unless you were shopping at big box stores. And so that's how it all led here. But for me, I was scratching that, I want to understand business more piece of my career puzzle that I'd always had happening, even when I was practicing law. So yeah, a bit of a winding road, but I would say still I was always headed towards a particular area, which was maybe trying to understand in a bit more of a direct way how businesses operated.
That's interesting. It's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, even though I'm married to an attorney who practiced for 20 years. Like the idea of like being able to, I think it's probably why she liked having long-term clients, is right. You got to know the business, whereas like you described, like not being able to really understand the business and getting pulled in and trying to get a deal across the line. Yeah. That would have been hard without knowing the nuances and knowing about because there's probably risks that you didn't know about. Right. So.
Yeah. It's funny that you just said that, because my practice definitely was very transactional. And I think what I've learned over time and over operating this business is that I enjoy the relationship piece of it a lot more. And it's probably, we had clients, I worked for financial institutions. So we did have the same bankers we worked with all the time, but the deals were always different. They were always very transactional. And I think that's probably another transition away from that way of doing work and spending all of my time to something that was a bit more, retail is still obviously very transaction based, but I do get more of that community feel to the work that we do now as opposed to before.
Yeah. It's different kind of transaction though. So we both have brought up the word risk a couple of times. I think you've told me, you even said it here, right? You're a little bit risk averse, kind of the training as an attorney. Yeah. I'd be curious to hear, how did you get past that? But I think what's interesting, I'm looking at the four of us on the screens, which our listeners can't see, but I'm like, okay, Mike and Vivian probably both will probably have similar things. And then Naomi and I have historically we've both been kind of at bigger companies where, so it's funny that my guess is you're going to say you're risk averse, but then I bet Naomi and I, we're all probably risk averse, but there's probably something else that helps you get past it.
There's a spectrum for sure. I mean, yeah, when you practice and represent clients, you're actually really trying to maintain that separation. You do want to become a trusted advisor, but at the same time, at the end of the day, they are the ones making the decision. That's very clear. That's always something that we kind of had to keep that up. And then in-house counsel was a little bit more relaxed in the sense that, you are maybe less risk averse in that I wasn't going to get sued, but I also was acting in the best interest of my one client. And as a Crown Corporation, so a business that's owned by the government in our country, there is a certain risk aversion that comes with that as well. It's a very conservative business to work for. And then when we started this business, I think in hindsight, as I look back over the last 6 years, we started out in a very conservative way in so many ways, as far as size, how fast we wanted to scale, how we wanted to fund the business. And maybe if I had had a little bit more of a risk-taking nature, we might have done that trajectory a little bit different. And then over time, you do, the risk involved with making decisions where you have 70% of the information at best. I went from not having to make the decision and working with the information we have. And generally we were at, close to 100%, and then letting a client make the decision, to being an entrepreneur and having very little information and having to make a call sometimes. And we still do every day. And I don't know if we get better at it. I think I might get more, numb is not the word either, but more, I'm just sort of now realizing that personally, professionally, you are never going to have all the answers. And I think as things get more complicated, both, when you start raising families and things like that, everything is unknown. And I'm just starting to really get okay with following things and having a bit of a winding path and not needing it to be linear and all of these pieces. And I think that serves decision-making a bit better now. Little less sleep lost, I guess you would say.
It's because you have great sheets.
Yeah, well, that too.
I want to know your sleep score, Vivian.
Well.
Do you have an Oura ring? What's your sleep score?
I don't have an Oura ring. And here's the thing, without veering too far off, but we have a product here in bedding that is very simple, and also in some cases, some people consider quite a commodity. I am a bit scared of all of the data that I could get because I know my own nature, which would be to be very captured by that data all the time and never really be satisfied. So I stay away from it a little bit and just rely on the fact that if I need a good night's sleep, okay, I've got a good mattress, a good bed, and, try to abide by the bedtime that my phone tells me, although I'm pretty good at ignoring it these days, and then go from there. I don't want to know. I don't want to know my score.
Yeah. I have to say, though, I echo the sort of numbness comment, right? Like, I know you didn't stick with that word, but I think that is often a difference between, there's a lot of folks that are naturally risk averse. And as you become more comfortable and maybe even start to enjoy the aspects of that sort of ambiguity, right? Or a little bit of the unknown, or this could go anywhere else. If you start to see that as a glass half full instead of a half empty, you might have signs that you're an entrepreneur that is like living for some level of excitement that is just very different than the day-to-day. Like, you kind of have to love it. Cause it's a roller coaster to go on.
I think I would go so far as to say you kind of have to love it, or at the very least, you kind of have to not let it give you a heart attack every week. Yeah. And I think it's just a lot more level these days than it used to be. And that's not to say, I still if I get an idea, I kind of can't put it down until I've, fleshed it out of my head. And those ups and downs are still very real. But when it comes to, you see so many of those infographics on social media about the way that the linear line is actually this like crazy wave. I love it. I hate it. This is awful. This is great. And it's very true, but I think I just don't react as much as I used to that kind of wave. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Vivian, you're someone that I've known now for a couple of years. And I would say it's only been recently that we've, gotten closer and started hanging out and gotten to know each other. And you are definitely somebody that I admire in the business space. And, one of the reasons I really wanted you to be on our podcast is because I think, because this is a marketing ops podcast, so steering it a bit to that, I do feel there are many parallels between entrepreneurship and marketing operations, right? So both involve strategic thinking, problem solving, focus on achieving specific goals. A specific problem that I think a lot of us, especially now, are dealing with is resource management, right? And, as an entrepreneur, I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs as well. And you need to manage resources, capital, human resources, time to build and grow your business, how to allocate them effectively to, maximize your returns. And on the marketing ops side, I think a lot of us are, especially those of us who are dealing with managing people and resources and expectations, we're managing smaller budgets, less tools, sometimes more tools too, right? And how do you cut that down? Technology teams executing marketing campaigns efficiently, like an entrepreneur, I find my day-to-day is about thinking about how do we optimize the resources that we do have to achieve the best possible outcomes. And I think that that's something that you're probably is in your wheelhouse, is in your mind on a daily basis too.
Hey everyone, Mike Rizzo here, CEO of marketingops.com and co-host of OpsCast. I've got a little secret to share with you, something that's been one of the best kept perks of our community until now. At marketingops.com, we've built a hiring program that's changing the game for marketing operations recruitment, and we're finally sharing it with the world. Our community is over 22,000 strong, and within that, we have over 4,400 members who are actively and passively seeking new opportunities. These are seasoned professionals with skills and experience spanning platforms like HubSpot, Pardot, Marketo, and so much more. Plus, we can help you fine-tune your outreach, targeting exactly the right candidates by region, years of experience, seniority level, or even agency experience. But here's the real cherry on top. When you hire through our program, your new team member gets a free membership or a virtual ticket to our annual conference. From day one, they're not just stepping into a new role, they're getting access to the training, networking, and support they need to hit the ground running. So if you're ready to unlock this incredible opportunity, it's time to let this secret out. Visit marketingops.com and find your next star teammate today. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep optimizing.
Yeah, I think that overall, in the marketing space, in the entrepreneur space, everyone is just being asked to do more with less all the time. And I feel very fortunate to be surrounded by some very capable people. So they are typically successful in that. But that also breeds more of, okay, great, now more and even less, right? And over the trajectory of our business, we started in 2018. And it was, like I said, a very conservative start. Let's just make one order of inventory, put a little bit of money in, do a little tiny loan, see how it goes. Really never saw anything. We didn't know. And I have to say, I probably should have thought through more what all the different options were. But we just thought, well, let's just get an order. And if it sells, great. And if it doesn't, well, we tried something and it was fun and we'll move on to the next project. And we were shot off like a rocket in 2020 without really being ready for it. Let's be honest. In that when the pandemic started, our customer base had redirected budgets, had a lot of time for discovery of new product. And so we actually found ourselves in the opposite. We found ourselves with lots and lots of resources. And I'd say at that point, we did the opposite of what we're now trying to face, which was, okay, how do we grow this thing? Who do we bring on? What's the best tech stack? What about agencies, these bigger agencies, and where do we want to go? We want to go into the US. We want to build out from Canada. So should we be using US agencies, notwithstanding the much larger cost? And then fast forward to 2024, and the flip thing has happened, really, is that contraction of business, contraction of resources, time, people, and really needing to learn how to deal with that. And one of them is to deal with seeing outcomes and projecting outcomes that are so different from what we had experienced during what I would call like the boom, right? We were barely advertising, and orders were flowing in. And now our category has really changed. And, we went from being in a category that really, luxury bedding very rarely was going on sale back then. The Brooklyns of the world, the Parachutes of the world, it was all semi-annual sales, and that was it. And now that's changed a lot. So yeah, we're always pivoting on what, we had this, I think we felt very overinflated in some ways, too many agencies, too much tech going on, all of these issues. And now we've actually just completely gone the other direction and scaled it right back. And recognizing that is going to lead to a very different outcome. You haven't just changed it a couple degrees, you've changed it many, many degrees, and being okay with that, because I think they're just as fast as it could have gone off, which it did, it right-sized itself. We've adjusted, and now we know what that looks like. 2.0 for me, to the extent that things start to go get busy again, will not involve that kind of scale the way that we tried it the first time. And so that's kind of a nice thing, in that we've learned to manage resources, and it's given us some very valuable lessons, which I'm sure your teams also experience, right? You're being asked to do more with less. You're being asked to get the most out of your people and the most out of your tech. And you make decisions that you really don't always know the outcome, right? And whether or not they'll be successful or not. And we've learned, I think, really to drop things a lot faster than we used to. We would sometimes hold on for too long, sometimes by force. Agencies that we signed on with, everybody wanted you for 6 months at least, right? So by the time you made that call and the 6 months is up, there's a bit of an inertia. And so we've learned a lot in having to go up and down.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, because I know we were going to talk about this to some degree as well, but this idea that you've brought up a couple of times of incomplete information, and then I'd like the tie-in of managing resources, because I think that's a real thing. Like whether we're at a big company or startup, right? That should be a big part of what we're doing, especially for leadership roles. And I see too many companies where I've been at where the people sort of spend money without really even giving much thought to it. And I've never understood that, because I think I've always had the mindset, like, would I spend this money if it was mine, right? Even though I might have the budget, and I always want to try to get the most out of it as I can. But so maybe I know we want to talk a little bit about the brand history and all that kind of stuff as well. But while we're here, what are some of you talked about this, like having to make decisions on incomplete information and make trade-offs. And it's something I like I said, I've talked about this a lot, and I talk a lot about it with coaching clients and things like that. But especially people who are not used to doing that from a manager standpoint. How hard was that for you to get to that point of recognizing I'm not going to, because I think a lot of what I hear about from people who are entrepreneurs who are seen as big risk takers is they actually try to manage that risk by trying to get as much information, get as much under control that they can. So there's less that's like the likelihood of a bad outcome is reduced. So but I haven't heard you talk about that per se. I've heard you talk more about just getting more comfortable with it, which to me is the fear. I don't like using the word fearless, because I don't think people are truly fearless, right? I think everybody's got fears. There's courage, right? People who act despite the fear. And that's just my own sort of nitpicky way of approaching it. But it feels like there's something similar here going on with this, incomplete information and still making decisions. Right.
I think that my legal training actually pushed me a lot to always want more information. I ask a lot of questions, and, like you said, you don't get satisfactory answers to make your decisions. And so it actually took a lot to train myself to not freak out if we were going to have to make decisions without information. And I think layer on top, when you're in a big organization, I think you can make decisions and they may be outcomes that are not great. They take people off track. People are not the business isn't meeting their KPIs. In a small business, there are some days where that kind of decision is like, which one is going to end the game, right? Like, am I going to walk into this corner and then that's it, like dead end? And so layer on top of that, like there's always this worry that you're going to make some decision that's literally going to end the business. And so I definitely not fearless, not at all, but just trying to just trying to avoid the business ending decisions is the first level. If you compare this to like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, not dying is the first one.
Right. Survive.
Yeah. Mike's nodding along like, oh yeah, that one sounds right. And then after if you can get a type of decision you have to make that isn't one of those business ending decisions, then trying to do it very strategically in a way that will not only get you, have you not die, but also give you that many more moves is how I've started to look at it. So that choose your own adventure. How do I keep this game going as long as possible? And that's a little bit what this is at the moment. I think as we see dips, I'll tell you, the last time there was a major economic dip, I was an insolvency attorney, right? So I was watching businesses go through challenging times, and I was watching their lenders go through challenging times, determining what to do. But it never affected me really all that. I was plenty busy. Let's put it that way, right? And so this time around, to watch everything that's happening and see what a direct effect it's having on our business. Sometimes when you are in this mode, you're obviously always trying to figure out ways to grow, but sometimes you're just sort of also waiting. You're like, let's not push so hard on pieces that are not going to move the dial today or a month from now or 3 months from now, because those external factors are just too strong for us to be able to fight against. So how do we just reserve our energy, bide our time a little bit, do the things that are going to help the business today, and kind of wait it out, and I think that might sound counter to what you'll hear a lot of entrepreneurs say, which is like, just grow at all costs. And I get that too, but there are times where you do need to sort of reevaluate and figure out what your next moves are that, again, extend the game as opposed to shortening your lifespan. Yeah.
I mean, that definitely resonates a lot. I think from a marketing operations sort of one thing I might glean if I was a listener to this and just trying to like also hear this through a different lens, perhaps, because I've now worn both hats. I do it every day. I would say, as a marketing ops pro or RevOps pro, you probably built a spreadsheet before making a decision on what to do next, right? Yeah. I did. I projected the heck out of our business to say, like, how do I do a conference for hundreds of people and not end the company, right? Yeah. Because we went so far into debt that we can't even come back out of it, right? And I think if you're listening to this and you say, yeah, that, like all of us, by the way, on the video nodded our heads because that's what we do. We build spreadsheets before making choices. I think engineering environments for you to create that sort of psychological safety of, hey, it's not going to be perfect, and the bet that you're making as a team maybe should head the direction as Vivian was talking about, which is, okay, well, what's going to help us keep this stuff moving now, but in a maybe pragmatic and measured way that allows us to open more doors, in the future. So if you have to make a choice between releasing a whole new, product to your team to go to market versus improving data quality, if one opens the door to future, roadmap and go to market activities for your team over the other, maybe that's the trade-off that you can make. And you can look at the decisions in that way versus trying to say, how is this going to impact the, revenue today or whatever. And I think trying to figure out ways to structure your decision-making process in that manner is, probably one of the most helpful things that I've been teaching myself in my entrepreneur hat versus the marketing ops hat, that like, I don't want to do anything until I have clear line of sight. I mean, I'm not tooting my own horn. I have built projections that are within a margin of error of 5%, which is stupid. Why did I spend so much time doing that? Like, there was no reason to spend that much time trying to be that accurate, right? I've had bosses tell me that time and time again. Like, there's a certain point where it's good enough and you just have to go, right?
But I think I was going to layer one more piece on there, is that there are a couple things that you touched on. I guess when we talk about it, I don't want to be flippant about making decisions, because you're right. We do sit and labor for hours in front of a screen, spreadsheets, all kinds of things, all kinds of research we're doing before having to come to said decision. I think the other piece that is sometimes unsaid is that, like, why do you spend that kind of time? Well, sometimes it's that you need to be able to point back to something if there is a failure, right? You have to say, well, this is the legal training again, which was always that there wasn't really always a right answer, but you had to have your reasoning behind the answer. And so long as you could demonstrate sound reasoning, you weren't going to be found to be negligent in your practice. That's how I was always taught, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that has been what's driven me a lot of times, even when you run your own business and nobody's really judging you other than perhaps, external partners, but nobody's really judging you on that. I've always had a hard time letting go of needing to have built a strong foundational reasoning behind every single decision, which can take a very long time. But it's partly because I had those worries about being judged if there was a failure. If the business fails, and this was kind of prior thinking. I don't think about it this way very much anymore. But in the first couple of years, part of that conservatism was simply to just not have a business started by 3 women who had no experience in retail fail, right? We were just so worried about the optics of it, especially when you leave a career that seems very stable. Why would you do that to go and do something like this and then have it fail? And then everyone's going to ask that question either to your face or not to your face. And so that was the early days. And now I'm not worried about the failure. I think that we have to recognize that businesses run their course sometimes, and not all. And I've seen actually a lot of founders in the last little while decide to kind of make a pivot, shut things down, change things. And I think there's as much courage in that decision-making as there is in the courage to start something. I think the courage to finish something or end it or decide that this is not the right time for this is probably braver than starting. So trying to remember that all the time in decision-making now is like, nobody's actually going to remember the failure either, except you, maybe. And entrepreneurs move on to next things, second, third, fourth tries, and nobody remembers the thing, even if you think your LinkedIn post is going to shatter some earth. It's not. 24 hours later, it's like, what's the next thing on the feed, right? So that's helped with being able to make decisions. It's not being that worried about external thoughts on that.
I appreciate that the e-commerce B2C brand founders talking about posting on LinkedIn. It's great. It's like more of you. Where are all the B2C people on LinkedIn?
They're all over my feed, but yeah.
Oh, really? Man, the silos are so real on LinkedIn. It's like hard to find y'all. It's funny.
It's true.
A lot of it, what you've said, Vivian, resonates with me because I think a lot of things around risk management too, right? And measuring twice, 3 times, 4 times, cutting once. And I think those of our listeners in marketing ops will feel that, because how many of us have woken up at 3:00 in the morning? Oh my God, did I change all the test links to live links? And is it going to go out at 8 a.m.?
It's real. That's real.
PST or EST? What did I do? Right? It's like, and I've done that too. You wake yourself up because you have all this anxiety, but it's almost one of those things where like sometimes things happen that you have no control over.
Yeah.
But there's almost a sense of calmness that can happen when you can show your work, right? Like sometimes you just screw up, but you know what? I did the work, and here's the work that I did, and this is what I did to make sure that those things didn't happen and put in those fail safes. And sometimes things just still go sideways.
Yeah,
right?
I think
part of life, part of business.
I think what I've heard here is a couple of things that resonate, and I think there's actually one of them is like, and maybe it's a Malcolm Gladwell book, but like there's something about like knowing what, like there, I think there's this view of quitting something. Vivian, you talked about these businesses that are shutting down or making that decision. And I agree with you. It takes a lot to do that. But like knowing when to quit is actually, I think, a really good thing. And I think it ties to this, like, how much analysis do I do before it becomes an exercise in, diminishing returns?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think knowing that, right, is a part of it. But we're all saying the same thing. Like, that still needs to be done, right? It's not like you just willy-nilly just make decisions completely on intuition, although I think intuition is undervalued in a lot of cases. So I think there's a piece of that, right? So I think that combination of knowing, like, I'm doing the analysis that I can with data or whatever, right? Or I'm looking at stuff and I'm using my intuition. And that combination there is probably going to deliver, hopefully, the best outcome. And then we learn from it.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do want to talk about sort of, I think, did y'all do a rebrand or something? And
we did. Yeah. So the brief history is we started this business with our very first name, really focused on the word sleep and what linen is made out of. And we also started only in bedding, but we knew all along that we would expand. If this thing was going to go, we would expand it to other rooms of the home, et cetera, et cetera. And so we actually rebranded in 2021. And just to extend our original brand from sleep to home. And then we thought, great, we're done. Cool. This is great. All these, and again, like, there were resources abound to put together beautiful marketing materials and videos. And I still look back on those assets. I'm like, oh, that was so fun, right? That was really some great time as far as creating marketing assets. And then once things stabilized at the beginning of the pandemic and we had enough supply to try to break into the US, which we actually wanted to do in 2020, but for obvious reasons, we held off on that for a little while until things stabilized. We went into the US, and it's a tough market, and everybody told that we had advisors, and we knew. It's not like we didn't know, but it's tough. It's a noisy market, as far as, especially in our category. There's businesses that precede us that have very deep pockets. So it was hard, right? But we were just trying to grow organically and go from community, which is what we've always done. That's how we started the business. And then, this is from my old legal days. Everyone says, you made it when you get sued. And I'm like, oh, that's the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. But yeah.
Given how this conversation started prior to hitting record today, I'm going to go with no. I'm going to avoid that.
nobody wants that. But what happened was, even though we felt like it was that breaking into the US market was very tough, well, we landed on the radars of somebody who did not want us to use our name anymore. And so, long story short,
To clarify, it's not the current name.
No.
Yes.
So Willit is the rebranded name, which we did in 2022, we were notified that a business in the US had a registration against a word in our name that would preclude us from using it if they didn't agree. And with legal backgrounds, the other thing when we first received these were to go, well, we have brand equity built up, and I think we should try to fight for it. Let's see if they'll be reasonable. Cole's Notes version, they were not. And it became apparent to us, because litigation in the US is expensive, that it would make more sense for us to rebrand again and walk away from our brand equity than it would to try to fight. And this is an outcome, a very unknown outcome that I did not want to take the risks to try to find out, right? And to spend the money to try to find out. And this is that evaluation. It was hard at the beginning, and then it became clearer and clearer. And I'm like, nope, this one is too risky. It's not worth it. And so within the span of 3 months, we underwent a complete rebrand. We worked with a fantastic team, an agency that we had worked with previously, who knew us, who knew the soul of the company, really, and could lead us through a rebrand that I have said before that rebranding your company after 5 years is like trying to rename your child, your 5-year-old child. You have so many memories tied to the old name. It's really hard to do it. And thankfully, we worked with a team who was really able to walk beside us to do it in a way that we would be satisfied with at the end, and in parts in the middle, it was really rough. We went through so many different options, and there are 3 co-founders. And so when we thought we'd have it, then somebody would sleep on it and wake up in the morning and go, nope, that's not the one. And then we'd be back to the drawing board. And luckily, everybody exercised a lot of patience, and we've worked together long enough that it didn't sink us. But yes, so in 2023, just over a year ago now, is June of 2023, we rebranded to Willit. And I'm really proud, actually, when I talk about the rebrand the last time in 2021, I'm actually really proud of a rebrand that we had to do, not necessarily by our own choice, but the outcomes and the way we chose to do it were very well done by our whole team. And we had people telling us, who were great loyalists of our old brand, that they followed along the whole story. The way we unveiled it was we did tell folks what was happening to a certain degree, and we told them, here's when we're going to rebrand, and here's what's happening. And our marketing team at the time was so great at telling that story.
I was curious if that was part of the narrative in this journey. Like, do you obviously you don't point fingers or anything like that, but you have to like elegantly explain, like, hey, we're not allowed to use this, and we're not going to fight it, but we want you to follow along, and we're going to do this
because
thing.
Otherwise, why are you rebranding again 2 years later, right? After, so this is new name number 2, and why is this happening? And so all of that actually went beautifully, and I can tell you that when we started the business, we were also really we didn't know enough, let's say, about consumer habits when it came to buying something like bedding. You would assume that somebody buys a whole set of bedding for their bed and they probably don't come back for years, if at all, right? We have been very pleasantly surprised, and now have come to expect it over 6 years. Our repeat customer rate is actually incredibly high. It's up over 50%. And people are back within 30 days. They are back within 6 months. They are back within a year, 2 years, and then like 4 years, they come and do the whole thing all over again. And that some of the LTVs of our customers are astounding to me. Like, I can admit that to you. As a founder of a business, I should have said, yeah, obviously this is what the LTVs are going to look like. But some days I'm really quite astounded and very grateful. So the people who are very loyal to the brand have stayed with us, and they've been engaged. Primarily, I think our email marketing has been very strong. And then second to that, social. But again, trying to divert resources to the right places when you're a very, very, very small team, which we are now, is always a challenge. But those marketing channels have always been quite strong for us. But where we struggle was to the loss of the brand from an SEO perspective was very, very painful. And it still is painful, frankly.
We're what, like 2 years into this rebrand now at this point?
We're a year, about 14 months in.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I'll say it because I think I've been kind of smiling because I know the kind of gymnastics that Vivian is going through to avoid saying a certain word. But I think that's a big part of it, right? They could not reference that word or previous brand at all, right? I mean, so you have to, like, from an SEO standpoint, you're starting from scratch as if it's a brand new business.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, there is a really you have to. For us, there's a needle to thread that's it's a small opening in that our prior name had the word flax in it. Flax is what makes linen. And so people actually search for the SEO for non-branded is very much linen bedding, flax sheets. Some people use the word, not a lot of people know what it's made of. They just say linen. And so, but there was some,
no idea.
right. And the other thing that's a bit aggravating, and this is a nerd point, is that flax and linen are effectively the same thing, right? Flax is the plant that makes the linen. And so when you look at SEO and you look at certain tactics that are used to strengthen the SEO of our competitors, is this use of the term flax linen, which from my perspective is like saying cotton twice, but it's sort of.
It's for me, what that did for me was I got triggered because I know a good number of human beings that say 3 a.m. in the morning. I was like, I know.
No,
you told me 3 a.m.
Oh, please don't.
No.
Please no.
Yeah, it happens all the time. Anyway, sorry.
I saw a sign the other day for a local business here that just opened that serves chai, and they're like, it's not chai tea. That's like saying tea twice. And so this is very much the same, but you might do it to actually SEO stuff words into your website, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think one of the things for us all in various different arenas has been knowing what the thing to do in order to win the internet, and then also really not wanting to play the game in order to win the internet. And I can't tell you necessarily whether I feel like decisions we've made in that vein are right or wrong, because yes, the business could be a lot bigger, perhaps, given certain things we could be doing, but they don't resonate with us and our values, let's say. And for better or for worse, we've operated the business with a lot of those values in mind. And yeah, it's a winning formula in some ways, and in some ways it can be an uphill battle for us, for sure, especially in this space.
Yeah, SEOs to me, I frankly don't understand why there's so many agencies out there taking money from companies for SEO, because to me it comes down, like, I know the algorithms change and yada yada yada, but to me it comes down to, like, write really good content for human beings, not for the search engines, and then do what you can to affect the search engines in other ways. But otherwise, like, because if you write for the search engines, it's going to be terrible for human beings to read.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think there's been a lot of improvement there. This gentleman, Branko, he's going to teach a course with us. We're going to make it available to our members, and it's going to tie SEO to sort of data and analytics. And that's kind of the point, I think, about all this stuff. Like, similar to our topic about is marketing ops marketing, SEO in a broad stroke term is you can lose some of the value of who can deliver search engine optimization in a very measured way, right? So at the end of the day, like for us as marketing operations professionals, like we're constantly trying to absorb and measure what's working and what's not. And the things that work are the things that are measured. I think we've all heard that, right? Like if you're measuring it, you're going to figure out how to make it work. And that's really what it boils down to for SEO, right? It's like looking at the landscape of what's possible, where there's maybe gaps for you to slide in because the long tail doesn't have a ton of competition. And then there's this incrementality to it, right? Like this, like, okay, we're going to slowly pick up, traction because we're grabbing onto these lower hanging opportunities. And lo and behold, if we're measuring it over time and we're practicing what we're measuring, then we'll actually see some growth, right? But like, pretending like you can just keyword stuff a page or just follow any type of model is like, that's not going to work. You got to like have systems in place to measure it. Right. And so, Vivian, I think that's where I wanted to go with the question next is you talked a lot about brand. We talked a lot about rebranding. You talked a lot about the value of brand and the community behind your brand, which frankly, I think is just wonderful for all of our listeners to hear in general, because that does take some of the pressure off of us as we think about being marketers in marketing operations or working with our quote unquote customers that are marketers and they're asking us to measure everything. But what are you doing today? Like, does your team just sort of broadly take a little bit of a relaxed approach and say, hey, we understand brand is going to impact us and we're not trying to measure all that stuff. And then for where you are measuring it, what are you trying to do today that might be different? Because you said the rebrand really teed you up to set up your sights on maybe the next, you're 14 months in now, and there goes my camera, so you can't see me anymore. But, maybe you're measuring things a little bit differently than you were before.
So, and I'll answer the question and I'm really curious when it comes to marketing ops for you and your listeners, as on the entrepreneur side, I think there's a very push and pull all the time about measurement. You have to be extremely disciplined if you want to do a lot of data analytics and then A/B test, pivot, and do it all over again, cycle after cycle after cycle. And admittedly, I think, especially in the e-commerce space, a lot of people who start brands are really about the brand and the product and the data analytics and the discipline it takes to run, on the e-commerce side. I think a lot of founders that's not the place they go, right? So I'm always I'm curious on the marketing ops piece too. Do people who work in this space, is it a lot more long tail? This is going to help from a brand perspective, so we have to have patience, or is it a lot more short term? You need to see results in order to, justify the spend for these things. How do you fight? Are we fighting the same friction? I don't know. I'm curious because, for us, you asked the question, what are we doing now? How are we measuring? Are we taking a bit more of a laid back approach? I think what we're trying to do is exercise patience in that building up a brand again is going to take time. And we frankly don't have the boost of a pandemic, thankfully, that would move this into a household name a lot faster again than it did back in 2020. So, and then from a measurement perspective, yes, we have eyes on SEO. And I think we have actually pivoted away from some of the maybe more vanity metrics that perhaps D2C has been known to really focus on to say whether or not marketing is working. We've both kind of scaled back on the paid advertising, as well as thought about again, with restricted resources, what is it that's worth measuring for us? And so we've made some changes in that regard, and to not be so driven by the things that we know aren't really great measures anymore, like ROAS and, conversion rate and so on. They're still important to see what's going on, but it's actually like, what's the storytelling as opposed to what's the number? So I don't think we've strayed much from the fact that we've always been more interested in brand building than we have perhaps to exercise the discipline to deal with the data and just build a business that way. And again, I can't tell you until this thing is done and dusted which one was better, but it's just not in our nature. And that's just something we have to deal with and one day perhaps hire for in order to kind of match what is not our strength. But yeah, I'm curious, what you all sort of smiled when I asked, what are you, what's the driver for people in marketing ops? Is it ROI of all sorts all the time? Or is it understanding that some of it, even if it can be measured, like you said, it's over a long term. So, it's a little bit more on the brand building side.
I think for those of us who are in the weeds and doing the work and in the tools and understanding where all of the information is coming from and pulling those reports, looking at those analytics, we absolutely see that needs to be brand awareness. There needs to be investment into that. That can sometimes be a challenge, translating that kind of investment to leadership or folks who are signing the checks, frankly, right? Yep. And I don't know if this is a specific B2B space issue, or do you also see it in the B2C space? But a lot of times it's like, okay, here's the investment. What am I getting out of it? Right? Tell me in 6 months, tell me in 3 months versus, what about I would love to have Apple's marketing budget where you can just put the Apple logo in a silhouette on a bus stop sign. Like, how are you measuring that?
Yeah.
Right? So,
They're like, we're not. We just need there's a certain line item of marketing expense that we have to hit every year on our books.
Right.
And that bus has some of it.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think I was smiling because I think my answer comes in two parts, Vivian. One is what I think many of our listeners will be, which is absolutely yes, we need to be measuring and showing ROI to the extent we can. I think a lot of people underestimate that. You use the word discipline. I love that. Like, that is truly, like, it requires a level of discipline that a lot of organizations, especially as they get bigger, actually, where you've got disjointed teams and there's lots of places where things to break down. They can't keep that up or consistently get it right. So I think ideally, maybe ideally is not even the right word, but I think a lot of our listeners would say, yes, we want to measure that. I, on the other hand, kind of have gotten to the point where I want as much measurable as I can. I recognize that the data is going to be dirty and it's not going to be, in quotes, right. I think a lot of people see data as it's either right or wrong. And I just think it's a false narrative there that they can't really get to that. And it never will be, especially in B2B, where you just have a lot of humans interacting with data on a daily basis, hourly basis. So I think there's value in measuring stuff, right? And I also think there's value in intuition. Actually, because of that, I think investing in brand does matter. And one of the people we've had as a guest, Kyle Lacey, is the one who I think really, I've had a couple of conversations with CMOs. He, I think in particular, has done a good job, what I can tell, where he measures what he can, but he does a really good job of telling the story to his C-suite and boards about what he's doing. And I assume he's still doing this as he's moved, but he allocated a percentage of his budget, and not a small one, like I think 15 to 20%, for stuff he just was going to do that was crazy and either not measurable or he just wasn't going to measure. And I think there's something to that. And I've heard this from other CMOs that I respect, like the idea of like, there's some stuff that you just have to try and be willing to know that it's not going to be measurable, especially not measurable in the short run. So I think, I've heard multiple stories now from people who are like, oh yeah, we did this thing 10 years ago and I still have people asking me about it. Like, that's long-term brand equity, right?
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I smirked when you asked the question because my answer was both.
Yeah.
My answer was both. We We are tasked with building for scale, which means we think for the long term, and we try to measure whatever is needed on the short-term horizon whenever asked. But we also push to say, is your window of measurement appropriate? Right? Like, is this actually the right amount of time? Do we all agree? Like, I'm not prescribing as a marketing operations professional what your test period should look like. Should it be 2 days, 3 months, 3 years? Right? That's not my job to figure out. My job is to set up the infrastructure for you to make the decision on what is right for you and your business.
Yeah.
And I would argue for brands like yours, everything is measurable to a degree. You just have to decide on what your time horizon is and what you want to measure, right? Hey, for the next 6 months, we're going to swap out all the photos that have women bending over, folding the sheets, to women standing up, holding the sheets, and just see what that does. Is the dwell time on the page longer? Is it shorter? Right? Is the heat map hotter or colder? What do you want to measure? That doesn't matter. Just pick something, right?
Right.
And then we'll do that for 6 months and see what happens, right?
Yeah.
But the discipline, to echo everybody, and specifically you, Vivian, right? To go back to that and say, oh, was that successful? Someone has to remember that it was a 6 month time horizon that we agreed on. And then you got to come back, right?
And have the patience, right?
Yeah,
And
patience is key.
Well, I think it's interesting. So somebody, I think it was Chris Willis, posted on LinkedIn today about, and it was, I think, tied to his marketing ops part of marketing, like, was
Yeah.
that he made a really interesting point that I hadn't really thought of, which is if you go back to marketing, 50 years ago, it was made up of the 4 Ps, right? He's like, today's marketers really focus on one, the promotion part. And that's like really it, in many places. And it was, so I think that adds like, so the point that like, should we measure or not? It's because so many people are focused on promotion and short-term returns that there's this big desire to get data back quickly, and it takes out this long-term view of, building value. Good question.
Really good question, and a really fun conversation. And I appreciate you joining us and sharing your story. And
Yeah.
I have some people I want to introduce you to as well.
yeah, no, for what it's worth, when Naomi and I talked about this, my immediate thought was, like, what could you possibly want to hear about? And hopefully people don't listen through and also think that on the back end. But, I always appreciate these kinds of conversations because I always take away at least one nugget from them. And this was really, really eye-opening for me too.
Yeah. I mean,
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. I think this reminds me of my summer camp a couple of years ago when we had the Ask a CMO, right? It's the same thing to me. Like I think there would be value for our listeners, sort of understanding how you think as a entrepreneur or leader. And I think that's valuable in its own right. Anyway, so thank you, Vivian. Definitely appreciate it. If folks want to kind of follow you or learn more about Willit, how can they do that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So we are still primarily digital. So shopwillit.com would be where you would go to find us. It's the same same handle on Instagram, and talk about it offline. Happy to extend a discount code to your listeners and get everybody trying some temperature regulating sheets, Michael.
Yes.
Get that onto your doorstep there.
Well, it's not about how much you spend; it's about how much you save, right? So
exactly. There you go. So yeah, thank you to all of you as well.
Awesome. Thanks to our listeners for continuing to support us. And if you have ideas for topics or guests, or you want to be a guest and bring a topic, feel free to reach out to Naomi, Mike, or me. Until next time, we'll see you then.
See you, everyone.